Hi class, welcome to our case study on the Kung or the San or the Juntoisi as they're called. And the Juntoisi, those are the cliques as Megan Beasley explained in the chapter that you're reading, the introductory stuff. So we'll talk a little bit. I just want to give kind of an introduction, quick overview, a little bit about the people of Dobi, which is the region, a little bit about their language. I'm not a linguistic anthropologist, so I don't speak Juntoisi, the click language, but we can talk about it, environmental adaptations, and a little bit about their settlement patterns. So in addition to, so there have been a few primary individuals whose names kind of we want to keep in mind when we're looking at the Kung Bushmen. One is John Marshall, who's the filmmaker for the film you watch, a Kalahari Family, which we watch different segments of. Megan Beasley, who you've read for this, is also in those films. She shows up when she was a young anthropologist working in the field with John Marshall, and so she shows up in some segments of the film. And then there are others as well, but to try and keep it simple and not overwhelm you, Richard Lee. Richard Lee did a lot of ethnography on the Bushmen. And then I should have introduced him as that as well. Bushman is also a term that they've used a lot in identifying themselves, and they've gone through different phases. Sometimes they call themselves Bushmans. That's typically considered a derogatory term, so when they self-apply it, I think it's okay, but usually we call them the Kung or the San or the Juntoisi. So Richard Lee, back in the early 1960s, was doing his dissertation research. He wanted to learn about foragers because they thought that that foragers, hunter-gatherer societies were the most basic humans, meaning that it was how our early ancestors lived. And so they were looking for common core features, like how would early human ancestors have really been, and looking at this in an evolutionary context, and also asking some questions with regards to ethnoarchaeology. So let me show you a little map. This is sub-Saharan Africa, modern day. Okay, so you have Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, and it's in this region that we find and here's Zimbabwe, right? So this is where Bushmen, I shouldn't call it but let's see, the Juntoisi live, and that Juntoisi is the name for them using their language. So so here in the shaded is the Dobi region, and you can see how it straddles Namibia and Botswana, and there's a couple of different sites, and in the film there's probably a better map I think that they show. So we have in the region, the people in the Dobi, we have different groups, and these are the terms that Richard Lee used, right? Because at the time these were the prevalent terms that they used to identify. So they talked about the Hottentots, so the Khoi, and they had goats and cattle. They were herders, so different from foragers. These were pastoralists. Then the San Bushmen or the Juntoisi or the Kung. Don't be confused. I mean, generally those terms are used. They're slightly different in terms of what they refer to, but kind of overlapping. So we try not to use the term Bushman. So in the 16th century, the Dutch were in this region, and the European settlement, of course, was basically a genocidal. The San were, there's fewer, I think, Kung Bushmen or San today, and they've been very marginalized. The film also, of course, talks about this. So they talk about, again, this is that racist history in anthropology that we need to acknowledge so that we can address, right? So they were called yellow, right? And they were the indigenous people. They're the indigenous people of Southern Africa, not just South Africa, but just Southern Sub-Saharan Africa. They use a click language, and that's what the different, like the apostrophe, the slash, things like that, that's what those refer to. There's basically 4 different clicks that they use, and they're made by progressively moving the tongue. First, the tongue starts behind the teeth, and then a little bit further back, and then the 2 in the reverse. So it's like, you can try and make the different clicks, and I have another slide about that in a second. But so the people in the Dobi were hunter-gatherers Still today, some are hunter-gatherers, not as much. Farmers, herders, and work in wage labor at the time that Richard Lee was there. So this is based on Richard Lee's work. And he characterized them. He says they were short, lighter skin, deep-chested, and had delicate facial features. This is based on Richard Lee's distinction, right? So then he talked about the black San, who were also these were based on the genealogies that Lee recorded. He said they were more related to, genetically similar to, the Bantu speaking group tribes, and they were more likely to be herding and doing farming, some foraging, but more limited. They were primarily pastoralists. Characterized as darker skinned, having stronger facial features, and taller. So here it's a little bit of an overview. The Kung, or the Juntoisi, are the people of the Dobie, are one of the most studied groups by anthropologists. But some of the key studies were done by Lawrence and Lorna Marshall when they came to Nainai in 1951. The film documents that, but John Marshall, their son. The Silibar, Tanaka, Cashton, and Kent studied the Gui, and of course that slash there is a click. Bleak, Gunther, and Barnard studied the Naro, and Lee and Devore, the Kalahari Research Group, studied the Juntoisi. So these are different groups in the San Dobie area. So people were living in that area of the Dobie at least 50,000 years ago, probably earlier, right? And there's a little bit of a debate, and this is where we get just a touch into the archaeology. Lee does that the San are actually pastoralists who fled Bantu overlords and became foragers. There's some archaeology that maybe supports that, but there really isn't good documentation of that. But that's sort of the oral history that's been passed down and that was recorded by Richard Lee, and John Marshall does discuss it in some of his writing. I don't think that's something we're going to address in this class, though. So the San language uses clicks. There's the click that's at the back of the teeth, as in tisk, right? The equal sign with the line through it is the tongue coming to both sides of the mouth, so wider. The tongue is wider and makes a click. The exclamation point is the tongue on the roof of the mouth, and the double backslash is the lateral click, as in when you're going, telling the horse to go. I'm not, like I said, I'm really not good at the clicks, but it's fun to try it, so you should try it. Just try and make the clicks, and you can learn more about these on this National Geographic page 2. And in the film, you'll hear Megan Beasley speak at some of the different segments. So, and of course you hear the native people speak. So we know about kinship, right? And consanguine kin are those that are related by blood, consanguine, right? So, so this is all about parentage, and this was important because Richard Lee was, in doing his ethnographic study, Richard Lee did genealogies of the Kung Juntoisi, and he, we're not going to discuss those a lot here, but that was one of the important things that he did as he was looking at patterns of where they moved, who they lived with, who they exchanged with, who they gave meat to, and things like that. And so let's talk some about the environmental adaptations. In the Dobie area, it covers 3,000 square miles, and it's in the Kalahari Desert, which varies between 1,000 to 2,000 meters above sea level. They have the Aha Hills, which are kind of the highest point, I believe, and that's at 2,100 meters above sea level. So it's very desert, very dry. And the Juntoisi define 4 different habitats. Dunes, which have mongongo trees, and mongongo trees to me, right, look more like a bush, but they're mongongo nut trees. They get the nuts from those. You'll see these in the videos. Then there's the flats, which are the plains between the dunes and the Malapo. The Malapo are the dry riverbeds where there has smaller acacia trees, and the hard pan, bare rock, and that's where the baobab trees are. So let's just look, just for the sake, so you can see this is the type of diagram that Richard Lee would create then to document the different types of vegetation areas. And so you have the Aha Hills here, and this is in the Dobie region, right? We have the different, these are the dried riverbeds and things like this. And then where were the dunes? I think the dunes are on this side. Yeah. As you can imagine, water is like the essential determining factor in their life and in their movement patterns, I think. They have permanent water holes in Dobie, but those are kind of seasonal. And sometimes they get water from the inside of a mongongo tree, or often from roots that they can dig up and you can squeeze water out of. So at the time of Richard Lee's work, the average temperatures, the hottest season was from October to February, so kind of the reverse of what we have in the northern hemisphere, and then the coolest season is in June and July. The sun recognized 5 seasons, so spring rains, and then summer rains, which are heavier, autumn, winter, and then a dry spring, which leads into, once again, spring rains, summer rains. Rainfall can be really variable, but so these are the data from the time period that Richard Lee was writing from, which is the 1960s. And you can see that the average rainfall could vary from 9 to 24 inches. And that variability has increased. Indigenous people throughout the world, but especially in kind of a more marginalized or extreme climate zones, are some of the hardest hit by climate change and some of the first to notice and experience the effects of it. So they were accustomed to droughts every 2 years out of 5, so 2/5 of the time, 40% of the time, and about a severe drought about 1 in 4. So they were accustomed to drought. In terms of animals, and most of this are animals that they would hunt. There were 50 mammal species, including the kudu, wildebeest, gemsbok, eland, rowan antelope, giraffe, and hartebeest were being kind of the most important. 90 bird species. The ostrich, they use the ostrich eggshells for many things. Guinea fowl, sand grouse, quail, dove, ducks being the most important. 25 reptile and amphibian species, lots of different insects. They used some of the beetles there to make poison for their arrows. They love honey. Honey is a really important part of their diet. Hunting contributed. So this, I think, is really important because remember that part of the reason anthropologists have studied forager groups like the Kung is because we are trying to make a lot of inferences about how we think early human ancestors lived, so that we can assume things about our evolution as humans. So meat contributes to about 30% of the calories in the diet. When a large animal is killed, it's distributed pretty much equally. Everybody gets some of the kill. And they use bows and arrows, spears, knives, spring hair hooks, and ropes and snares. As you see in the film, of course, they have rifles now. And of course now there's much less of the hunting and gathering because of the changes that have happened in the area and the ways that the Kung have been taken off their land and put into settlements and things like that. And there's a lot of different dynamics there that we're going to get into and that the film really gets into. So they would use poisoned arrows, sometimes use dogs and things like that, and use snares. And so Richard Lee, of course, documented the different hunting tools that they used. There's a baobab tree. Mongongo nuts is incredibly important. That was the bulk of their calories. The baobab tree as well was really important. Marula also gives nuts, and they would use edible gums and saps from some trees. Many roots and bulbs that they would eat. Melons, which they call it bitter melons, and I don't know if we'll have time. If you have time and you can watch the whole Kalahari family series, you'll see some series some parts on that when they have extreme drought and they are eating the bitter melons, and then some beans. And here's a photo of a bitter melon. So the tools that they use commonly in gathering, I think this is really interesting, are kind of things to carry infants in, right? To wrap and carry infants in around the woman, digging sticks, and things to carry what they're gathering in. So C is a small bag, B is the cross, F is the baby carrier, right? And things like that. Anyways, I think it's very interesting, the techniques that they use. So they had different settlements and villages where they would go at different times of the year. So during the dry season, they'd want to be near a permanent water source, one of the permanent water holes. They had more well-constructed huts there, and they would always be laid out in a circular design. And this would have been for typically about 20 to 50 people, and they'd be there May through October. So how many months is that? That's about 5 months, maybe 6 months. And then they'd have rainy season villages from October through March, and there you'd have, and it could be smaller huts or it could be even more. So a lot of range and variation there. And they could be there anywhere for 3 weeks or for 3 months, right, before they'd move. So these were hastily constructed. These would be things that were thickly thatched because of the rainy season, but they might move around up to 6 times in one rainy season alone. And so these would also be set up in a circular design, but these were much more temporary, quickly made, versus the dry season villages where they would just kind of hunker down there near the water hole for the duration of the season. So in the village layout, there's kind of a central plaza, right? And then circle of huts and fireplaces, and then ash dumps, and then cooking pits, and then an empty area, and then zone 5, which is this gray, the outer gray ring, was the zone for defecation, and then beyond that was the bush. Shade trees were considered really good, and there's the annotations for the diagram. When they're in settlement camps, kind of later on, we have no huts. They'd be there for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. Sometimes they'd have places where they would, if they're on hunting, they might just build a fire and kind of stay there for the night. And when they were, sometimes they'd take on work watching the cattle for the pastoralist neighbors, and those would be shaped differently. Those camps would be crescent shaped, and they'd be near where the cattle are that they were watching, and it could be anywhere from 1 to 20. So it really depended on the size of the group that they were with. So just a quick little introduction. I hope that the film is engaging for you. I hope that you enjoy the ethnographic film, and I hope that it helps bring you into the world of the Kung, the Juntoisi, that we're going to be studying for this whole case study.